Beautiful. One other housekeeping thing is that we love seeing you all here. We love that y'all are a part of this and that you're spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. We really appreciate audience participation and engagement. We'll have a couple opportunities throughout the training for y'all to share your thoughts and perspectives. So if you feel comfortable participating, please do. We appreciate that. We value that so much. So welcome. I see a lot of new folks here that I haven't seen before, and that makes me so happy. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are Instituto. Our mission here is to build political power with communities of color and low-income communities in Arizona. And we do this through accelerating and incubating organizations and individuals in our community so that we can mobilize voters, develop leadership, and build capacity. So those words accelerate and incubate, what does that really mean? Well, we know that our communities are already extraordinary. They're already incredibly talented. So what we do is we work to support and develop leaders from within. We do that through trainings, just like this one, fellowship programs, funding opportunities, and building intentional partnerships with folks in the community. So we're really excited to be here today. Thank you again so much for joining us. My name is Emily Nunez. I'm the program coordinator here at Instituto. We have a couple of our other team members as well. Shelly Jackson is our program director. She's amazing, honored to work with an incredible team of people. We're also joined by Victoria today. Victoria, I'll pass it to you if you want to introduce yourself and say hi briefly.
Hi, everyone. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Emily's going to be talking to you about this awesome thing and topic, but then also there will be a time for you all to fill out a survey. So this is my plug for as a data person to please fill out that survey. That really gives us very important information for us to continue building our programs. And I get very excited when I build a survey, and then we work really hard for those. And then to get you all's input is really gold for us. So muchas gracias.
Love it. Thank you. And Tanya couldn't join us today, but she's our communications and marketing coordinator. She's also super amazing. We have Melissa in the room as well. Melissa, you want to say hi? Just give us a wave.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, we have a full team here at Instituto now. That's been something that we've been working on growing in the past year. We're really excited because we are continuing to grow our capacity over the coming months. We'll be hiring on a couple new folks. So just grateful to be here in community with you all and with our team. We're also super fortunate today to be joined by two incredible panelists. Our first is Dr. DeShawn Taylor from the Desert Star Institute for Family Planning. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, DeShawn, to introduce yourself. If you could just tell us a little bit more about your organization, the communities you work with, and I would also love to hear what brought you to this work in reproductive justice.
Hello, am I going to be on screen or no?
Totally up to you. You can keep your camera on and off. We can't see you right now though. Yeah.
You said you can't see me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I can't see me, so I don't know what my background looks like.
You're good. It looks like your office. It's nice.
Okay. Oh my, and so somebody's printing to my printer. Just all kind of craziness happening. But thank you so much for having me. I am the founder and CEO of Desert Star Institute for Family Planning, and I hope this isn't too much noise in my background. I don't know why somebody's printing to my printer while I'm having an event. But I was initially inspired to create Desert Star Institute for Family Planning in 2017 to fundraise to support my abortion training efforts. And the following year, in 2018, I expanded the scope of the work to include providing long-acting contraceptives to uninsured people, and then added on community engagement in education. And so as I personally have evolved into operating from a reproductive rights framework to applying reproductive justice principles, my organization has evolved as well into a public-facing reproductive justice organization. So Desert Star Institute for Family Planning is a Black woman-led organization working from the foundational principles of reproductive justice. Our mission is to create equitable access to reproductive health care for womb-bearing people while centering Black and Indigenous people of color. We form intentional partnerships and programming that build community and center Black and Indigenous people of color. And so for time, I'll drop a link in the chat to our priorities on our website. And I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, DeShawn. We're so happy to have you. And yeah, it looks like she's going to be dropping some links. We will also be sharing links at the end. I created like a community action resources guide, so it'll have the information for both the organizations that are represented today, as well as many more in our community. So thank you again, DeShawn, for sharing. Our second panelist, Desiree, we're also so excited to have them here today. Desiree is one of our alums from our Monzon program. So I'm always glad to be in community with you, Desiree. I'll go ahead and pass it to you as well, so you could introduce yourself, tell us more about Planned Parenthood Arizona, the communities you work with, and I would also love to hear what brought you to this work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Emily said, my name is Desiree Perez. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I'm the organizing manager with Planned Parenthood Arizona, which is our C3 organization, and Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona, which is our C4 organization. And I got into the work because when I moved to rural northern Arizona, I had a hard time finding quality healthcare. And it was one of the first times where I had experienced your zip code or your geography being a barrier to your healthcare and your rights. And I had the opportunity to get involved with Planned Parenthood shortly thereafter, and I haven't looked back. As far as Planned Parenthood's mission, our goal is to promote and protect the reproductive health and rights, so that everyone in Arizona can make their own decisions about their bodies, their health, and their futures. And we will get more into the difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Desiree. And thank you to both of you for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we jump into the meat of our training today, I'm going to go ahead and review our learning objectives quickly. We're going to be understanding what's happened so far in the Arizona legislative session and what to expect next. And we'll be focusing in on reproductive rights issues at the policy level as well as the community level. We'll be explaining the difference between reproductive rights and reproductive justice, and identifying the ways that reproductive justice intersects with other forms of justice. Again, we'll be recognizing some of the major reproductive rights bills in the Arizona legislature right now, and then describing proactive ways that we can fight for reproductive justice, both at the policy and at the legislative level, as well as in our communities and on the ground here. And lastly, we'll be celebrating National Abortion Provider Day together by creating a thank you card for some abortion providers here in our community. Awesome. So before we jump into the Q&A discussion with our panelists, I just want to briefly discuss some of the things that have happened thus far in the Arizona legislative session, and give you a heads up of what we can be on the lookout for next. For those of you that might not know, the Arizona legislative session runs for 100 days, and we are right about the 50-day mark. So we're pretty much halfway through. So some of the things that have happened so far, there's been a ton of anti-LGBTQ bills, especially those that are impacting trans youth. So some of the major ones, there's a bill that's been stalled as of now, which would limit bathroom access for trans students in public schools. There was a bill that was recently approved in the Senate that will stop trans girls from being able to participate in K through 12 school sports, preventing them from being able to be a part of the girls' sports teams. There was a bill that was recently passed in the Senate that bans healthcare professionals from providing gender-affirming care to trans youth under the age of 18, and a bill that was stalled that bans schools from using a student's gender pronouns if they differ from those on the student's birth certificate. So again, a bunch of really harmful and devastating anti-LGBTQ bills. We'll be touching on some community organizations towards the end of this training that are doing work specifically around these issues. issues and providing you with some calls to action so that we can all do our part to step up against these. In education, budget cuts bills, gratefully, we passed the expenditure limit to raise the expenditure limit. For those of you that don't know, our public schools were facing a nearly $1.2 billion budget cut. And we were, about to face massive school closures, teacher layoffs. So luckily, we were able to raise that expenditure limit so that schools are able to access and use that money for the remainder of the school year. There's also been quite a bit of bills around parents' rights and specifically around parents' rights to their students' information. There was a bill that was recently stalled in the legislature that requires school employees, that would have required school employees to disclose anything students told them in confidence, even things like the student's sexual orientation and gender identity to the parents. And schools who refused to abide by these bills could have been punished with fines, dismissals, suspensions, etc. Another education bill that to be on the lookout for that's currently stalled in the legislature is one that would require students to get written consent from their parents to participate in any kind of school clubs having to do with sexuality or gender, such as the Gay Straight Alliance and clubs like that that are popular in schools. Another bill is in regards to sex education. It would ban sex education before 6th grade, and it would require these types of sex educations to emphasize biological sex over gender identity. So again, a lot of these very harmful anti-LGBTQs we're seeing in our education system. And of course, we'll be providing resources for y'all at the end to take action in your own communities. Around voting rights, I'm gonna just briefly touch on this because I'll be playing a short video from one of our partners, Progress Arizona, that dives deeper into some of the attacks on voting rights that we've seen at the legislature. But some of the bills are bills that would make it a crime to misplace a ballot, bills that would restrict the use of ballot drop boxes, bills that would make it a felony for somebody to register to vote on election day, bills that would create a fraud unit to investigate voter fraud, and then a bill that would potentially eliminate emergency voting centers. So again, bills that would pretty significantly disenfranchise thousands and thousands of voters across our state. With police and public safety, this was a pretty popular one that's been in the news lately. There was a bill that was passed that actually bans close range recordings of police. So it actually has now made it illegal to record a police officer within 15 feet. So obviously very problematic when we think about police accountability and the harm that police have caused our communities, especially Black and brown folks. Another bill in regards to police and public safety, a bill that was passed requires police agencies to independently investigate police shootings and use of force incidences, which sounds great in theory, but when you read this bill in greater detail, you find out that these investigations would be sent over to a neighboring law enforcement agency. So these investigations would be done by fellow police officers. So again, very problematic when we think about what police accountability and community safety and justice can look like. In reproductive rights, we won't dive too deep into these because again, we'll be touching on them throughout this training. But some of the major ones, thankfully, the bill that would have banned the manufacturing and prescribing of the abortion pill failed. So that's a great win for reproductive rights. But unfortunately, on the flip side, the Senate just passed a bill that would ban abortion in Arizona after the 15-week mark. So again, we'll be touching on this later in the training. Before we jump into our Q&A, I'm going to play this video for y'all from our partners, Progress Arizona. They do this series every year during the legislative session called Capitol Watch. It's a really incredible series where they give you weekly updates about everything that's happened and just like I did, what to expect next. So I highly recommend y'all checking this out and staying up to date with it. It's a great way that I like to stay informed, and I would, again, really recommend it. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you all.
Welcome to the second episode
How is sound? Can I get a reader on sound? We're good? Awesome.
of season 2 of Capitol Watch. The Arizona legislature won't even let us breathe. It's why with Capitol Watch, and I'm here to give you a rundown on what's been happening at the Arizona legislature. To begin, Wendy Rogers, the senator from District 6 in Flagstaff, was censured this week by a vote of 24-3. This came after she called for the hanging of political enemies and spoke at a white nationalist conference hosted by known white supremacist and Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. Her far-right extremist rhetoric is abhorrent and dangerous, promoting hate and violence against Arizonans. To censure her is not enough. She still even has her committee assignments. Contact your state senators to demand that she be expelled from the Arizona legislature at once. Some of the conspiracy theories about the 2020 election that Rogers promotes are why we decided to host a carnival this past Monday on the House lawn. With the event, we wanted to expose the GOP-led Arizona legislature for what it is, a circus where the absurd and reckless conduct of GOP clowns threatens Arizonans. Unfortunately, GOP-sponsored bills continue to prove their foolishness. To that end, GOP lawmakers have proposed HB 2448, a bill that would mandate an NRA firearms training course in all Arizona schools. Representative John Kavanaugh of Fountain Hills even said that he would, quote, forward the name and address of the parent to Child Protective Services if they opted out of this. I thought the Republicans were all about school choice, but apparently not when it comes to promoting violence. Moving to the GOP's continued assault on voting rights, the Arizona legislature has passed HCR 2025 and SCR 1012, a voter ID referral that would introduce unnecessary and burdensome restrictions for Arizonans who vote by mail, which is the majority of Arizonans. It will be on the ballot this coming November. If passed, it would lead to massive voter disenfranchisement. Now is the time to start telling everyone you know to vote no to protect our voting rights. With all of the negatives coming from the GOP, it's important to keep in mind the victories we earned. Thanks in part to the pressure that you all put on GOP legislators, HB 2811, which would have banned medication abortion, was voted down. That vote was a massive win for reproductive rights. That's it for this week. Make sure to follow us on our socials for live legislative updates as they happen. And go to progressarizona.org to sign up for our newsletter and get more updates than what we can cover here.
Awesome. Thank you all for watching that. And again, highly recommend Capitol Watch through Progress Arizona on YouTube. But dang, as somebody who was a public school teacher, some of those education bills just really hurt my heart. But I'm grateful to be, in a community with you all and in spaces like these where we can educate ourselves and empower ourselves and mobilize our community to take action against some of these really harmful bills. And so on that note, we're going to go ahead and jump into our conversation about reproductive rights. And before we move into the discussion part with our panelists, I just want everybody to pause for a minute and go ahead and use the chat function in Zoom to answer this question. When you think about the words reproductive justice, what comes to mind? This might be a phrase, it might be just one key word. So just take a couple seconds and visualize what comes to mind when you hear that phrase, reproductive justice. And let's see what we see in the chat. Advocating, autonomy, yes, love those buzzwords. What else? Equal opportunity and access for all. Real choice. I like the use of that word, real choice. Equity. What do you think of when you hear the words reproductive justice? What comes to mind? Love that. Thank you for sharing. Reproductive care for all genders. Yeah, absolutely. Give folks a couple more seconds and see if anybody else wants to throw out some words or phrases. Again, we love and appreciate participation. We love hearing your voices and perspectives. Sister Song and Loretta Ross. Yes, absolutely. Health. Love that, Haley. Safe environments to raise a family in if you choose to have children. So important. Intersectional solutions. Yes, we'll be talking about that word intersectional very soon. Right of privacy. Thank you, Kathleen. Awesome. Thank you all so much for giving out those answers. Such important things that we'll be covering today. Appreciate the participation. And on that note, we'll go ahead and jump into our discussion with our panelists. I'm so excited for this conversation today. We're going to start out with just covering all the basics regarding reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and then that keyword that we talked about and that I saw somebody mention in the chat, intersectionality. So we're going to have Desiree go ahead and start us off. Desiree, what are reproductive rights?
Thank you for that question, Emily. Well, when we're thinking about reproductive rights as a framework, it's concerned with your legal right to access reproductive health care and medically accurate information about our bodies and our healthcare options. So Planned Parenthood Arizona, for example, is a reproductive health and rights organization. We provide reproductive health care and education, and our advocacy arm, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona, works to protect the legal rights of individuals to access that healthcare and information. We fight legislation that would chip away at reproductive rights. We litigate unconstitutional laws that infringe on reproductive rights, and we organize to empower our communities to protect, expand, and enshrine reproductive rights. But historically, the reproductive rights movement has not been intersectional. You can think about it in terms of equality versus equity. So just because somebody has equal access to the legal protections, it doesn't mean that everybody has equitable access to their rights and freedoms in the reproductive rights movement. I think we can aim as Planned Parenthood and other reproductive rights organizations to operate with a reproductive justice lens to guide our work, but we are not reproductive justice organizations or reproductive freedom organizations, and that credit really has to go to the organizations and people who founded that work and are doing that work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Desiree. And I love that the comparison that you gave between equality and equity. That's a great way to think about it. Thank you again. I'm going to pass it over to DeShawn now so that she can dive a little bit deeper into what is reproductive justice, how does it differ from reproductive rights? And then when we think about reproductive justice, how does it intersect with all other justice issues in our society?
Thank you, Emily. I think that advocates are starting to understand this a little bit better, but definitely a couple of years ago, the terms reproductive rights and reproductive justice were being used interchangeably in spaces, and they are definitely not the same. Because reproductive oppression affects women, girls, and femmes in multiple ways, a multiple approach is needed to fight this exploitation and advance our well-being. So I like to provide three major frameworks. First is reproductive health, which deals with service delivery. The second is reproductive rights, which addresses legal issues. And the third is reproductive justice, which focuses on movement building. And so, although distinct frameworks in relation to their approaches, together they provide a comprehensive solution. Ultimately, as in any movement, all three components, service, advocacy, and organizing, are crucial. And so, reproductive justice is a framework created by the Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, a group that evolved into the well-known organization Sister Song, emerged in 1994 to surge a national movement that prioritized the needs of marginalized women and their families and communities. And so this reproductive justice framework analyzes how our ability to determine our own reproductive destiny is linked directly to the conditions of our community. And these conditions are not just a matter of individual choice and access. Reproductive justice addresses the social reality of inequality, specifically inequality in the opportunities that we have to control our reproductive destiny. So moving beyond a demand for privacy and respect for individual decision-making, we want to move to include social support necessary for our individual decisions to be optimized. This framework also includes the obligation of our government to provide the conditions for our choices to be safe, affordable, and accessible. And these are three minimal cornerstones of government support for all individual life decisions. So in terms of a definition, reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children that we have in safe and sustainable communities. And so this framework transcends the argument of choice that the women's rights, reproductive and reproductive health movements emphasize. And it deems necessary that there is access to comprehensive reproductive health care, which includes safe abortion, as well as access to contraceptives, sexual education, STI prevention and care, and other ways to support families.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, DeShawn. I'm glad that you mentioned, some of the history behind the reproductive justice movement. It's so important to give credit where credit is due, right? This movement was founded and continues to be led by Black women. I want to be very explicit about that. I also think it was great that you emphasized that reproductive justice, expands this conversation beyond just whether we have the right to have an abortion or not, and includes all of the things around that, right? Do we have, our ability to access healthcare, our ability to raise our children in a safe and supportive environment and with dignity, all the things. So we can start to see how it intersects with things like police brutality, workers' rights, fair pay for all people, a livable wage, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you so much for that. We're going to continue our conversation and dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics so we can explore the nuances and some of the complexities when we talk about reproductive justice and when we think about how it really shows up in our community. So on that note, we'll go ahead and jump in to our next question with Desiree. Desiree, how do we see these reproductive issues show up in policy? And what are some of the major bills related to reproductive rights that are being discussed right now in Arizona?
Yeah, in regards to reproductive rights, I would want to lift up, there have been 3 major bills introduced this session with the intent to ban abortion. So HB 2483 was introduced. It is a Texas SB 8 style six-week gestational age ban that essentially would deputize any person to carry out the law by means of suing anyone they believe to have had or to have provided or to have facilitated an abortion over that 6-week period for a minimum award of like $10,000. That extreme bill passed the House, but it hasn't moved since. And we believe that that bill was introduced in part to make SB 1164 look reasonable. 1164 is a 15-week ban similar to the recent Florida 15-week ban and the Mississippi 15-week ban that is actually before the Supreme Court right now. So SB 1164 has crossed over from the Senate to the House, and it's actually scheduled to be heard by the House Judiciary Committee tomorrow morning. So that bill is on the move, and that's really concerning to us. Finally, there was House Bill 2811, which sought, Emily, you mentioned this in your introduction, but it sought to ban essentially all medications used to provide abortion care. Thankfully, that bill died on the House floor. But again, it's our belief that these more extreme abortion bans were introduced so that one of them had a chance of getting through, and SB 1164 seems to be the most reasonable, right? They're trying to make it look like a good compromise. But our position is that there are no good bans. There are no reasonable bans. And for that reason, we are not happy that even if these other two bills have stopped or died, we need to stop 1164 as well, and protect the reproductive rights of Arizonans.
Thank you so much, Desiree. And yeah, I love that, right? No good bans, no reasonable bans. When we're talking about our ability to access a safe abortion, yeah, no such thing. Thank you so much for giving us those explicit examples of policy. And like I said earlier, we'll be giving you explicit ways that you can take action against these bills through signing petitions, volunteering, et cetera. And we'll touch on those a little bit later. So thank you again, Desiree. Now I'll go ahead and pass it over to DeShawn. When we think about these different bills and these policies in our communities, how do these types of policies affect the community here in AZ, beyond, and especially when we think about those who are more marginalized?
So when you're kind of paying attention to the narrative and the discussion, how things are being talked about across the country and including here, we have a lot of folks talking about how abortion bans are racist and hurt Black people the most. Yet we historically have not seen a significant effort to involve Black voices and the voices of other people of color and folks from other historically marginalized groups in the work to oppose these harmful policies as they are being introduced and move their way through state legislatures. This year, there is a group of us Black-led organizations, grassroots organizations, who have come together in alignment to participate more visibly and fully in the legislative session this year, and to start to brainstorm ways of getting information to communities that are deeply impacted by these harmful laws. Arizona has some of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. There has been a new restriction signed into law every year, but one in Arizona since I arrived in 2009. And that was when one of the first bills passed that wasn't vetoed once Jan Napolitano was tapped for Obama's cabinet, and we've had Republican governors here ever since. So I would say that several times a week, there was an angry person in my clinic resisting the rules that are in place for them to receive abortion care. And I remind myself that the average person is living their life and they're not thinking about the fact that one day they may need an abortion. However, as advocates, we must figure out how we can get the most impacted communities activated to start to make a difference in the state and local policies, so we can sustain and expand access to essential reproductive health care, which includes abortion. One of the biggest impacts of these anti-abortion bills, besides the fact that they restrict access to essential health care, is how they spread confusion and disinformation, especially targeting communities of color. These bills are often convoluted and very poorly written, leaving pregnant people and abortion providers in the dark about how the state will enforce these laws. And honestly, the confusion is the point, right? Confusion sows fear. And so it creates this chilling effect where people in the community don't know maybe that abortion is still available to them. They may delay seeking the care that they need. They may end up in these fake clinics that are specifically targeting them and very well funded, and then ultimately, delay or size out, for example, of ability to do abortion by medication if that's what their preference is. And so what we want our legislators to understand, right, which most advocates understand, is that no one is making the decision to terminate a pregnancy in a vacuum. Just like any other major life decision, seeking abortion care is one that is made based on a pregnant person's life circumstances, resources, and social supports. And so one of the things that I've personally been thinking about, and especially facing what we're facing now in this environment where we're all awaiting, the Supreme Court decision on the Mississippi 15-week ban case, is that abortion can become illegal in half of the country. And, how do we get the word out without being like super like extremist about it, but understanding that we are in a moment where, things will look very different for us in the next few months. And there are people who will be impacted by this that don't really know or understand the severity of the moment that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, DeShawn. Yeah, and as you said, it's really that question of how we get the most people in the community activated as possible. And I like that you mentioned, that we really are in this moment, because I hope it creates some sense of urgency among the folks in the room, that if there's ever been a time to act, it is now. So yeah, just thank you for sharing those points and for touching on how in particular it impacts some of our more marginalized communities and communities who might not even realize the long-lasting effects of some of these really harmful bans. Thinking about, the future and where we're headed and how these bills can impact us in the near future and in the longer term, we're going to jump into thinking about the role that we play as individuals and the role that we play as community members in advancing reproductive justice, and thinking about how we can flex our power and take action to fight for reproductive justice for ourselves, for our loved ones, and essentially for our entire community. So on that note, we're going to jump in, and this overarching question again is, right, how can we take action to promote and fight for reproductive justice? And in thinking about these issues around reproductive rights, reproductive justice, these issues tend to be, obviously very controversial and polarized in Arizona. And sometimes it can feel like we're always on the defense, right? We're always defending harmful bills that are being put in place. We're always trying to defend policies that infringe on our rights. So I just want to kind of reframe that conversation a bit to be thinking about proactive ways that we can fight for reproductive justice. So on that note, Desiree, I'll go ahead and start with you. What are some examples of proactive legislation that protects reproductive rights?
All right, thanks, Emily. Yeah, this session, we have had proactive legislation introduced by reproductive rights champions in the legislature. So, for example, I think Representative Powers Hanley introduced HB 2192. It was an amendment to some existing regulations around sex education in Arizona. Her amendments would make it so that sex education programs are comprehensive, medically accurate, and are opt-out versus opt-in, so that if families have objections, they can always pull their children, but it is easier for the majority of children to access those programs if and when their school districts offer comprehensive sex education or sex education, which is not a requirement in our state. So that's one example. I think it's good to note that many people in the legislature have introduced bills supporting postpartum coverage through access. So Representative Germain, Representative Shaw, and even Senator Pace have all introduced legislation to support expanding postpartum coverage through access up to 12 months. That's huge when it comes to the quality of life, the health for people post-pregnancy. Also Representative Salman introduced HB 2769, which would require the state to provide benefits to cover the costs of a forced pregnancy, and a forced birth when people are barred from accessing abortion care. But at this point, the only legislation that is going to pass our conservative majority legislature is looking like the 12-month postpartum expansion for access. Yeah, I will jump in and also say, given the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case that's before the Supreme Court, and Arizona's existing pre-Roe abortion ban, when we are thinking of the future of reproductive rights in Arizona, we need to consider what it's going to take to enshrine access to abortion at the state level. You know, whether that's through an amendment to our state constitution or what have you. But beyond the legislative process, we also need to consider how we're making access to reproductive health care and information equitable. You know, how do we make it accessible in action, not just in name or in legal protection, to all of our community members? And I think at the very foundation, if people are wondering, what can I do about this? There will be legislative action, there will be electoral action, but I think it even starts with destigmatization and conversations in our own households, in our own families, in our own friend groups. And I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Desiree. DeShawn, anything else you want to add to that? Examples of proactive legislation?
Yes, so had a couple of bills dropped proactively to increase access to abortion by repealing some laws that are already on the books that restrict access to abortion. And so one of those is House Bill 2093, so 2093, which was dropped by Representative Athena Salmon, which would allow Arizonans to access medication abortion care through telehealth appointments without having to undergo an ultrasound unless medically necessary. And, you know, the background to this one is in December of last year, the federal government lifted the outdated medically unnecessary requirement that mifepristone, one of the 2 drugs required for medication abortions, be dispensed in person. Throughout this pandemic, people across the country have been able to access medical abortion care through telehealth visits and having the medications mailed to them. But because of the laws on the books here in Arizona that ban telemedicine for medical abortion and also require in-person administration of mifepristone by a physician, we have not been able to innovate in our state to provide this care more safely to the people of Arizona. And so this bill would have addressed that. Now, there are some other restrictions in place, like the waiting period for surgical abortion, for example, but this would have been a great start to increasing access to medical abortion for Arizonans, and also keeping people safe as we're going on year 3 of this COVID pandemic. And then there was House Bill 2097 and Senate Bill 1672. The House bill was dropped by Representative Salmon, and then the Senate Bill 1672 was co-sponsored by Senator Tehran. And so what these bills would do would be to repeal the unconstitutional, outdated pre-Roe v. Wade provisions of Arizona law that criminalize providing abortion care, as well as advertising the provision of abortion and even some contraceptive services. And so this law, this pre-Roe law, has not been enforced since 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. And that year, the Arizona Court of Appeals acknowledged that the provisions, which had already been challenged in court, were unconstitutional because of the Supreme Court's ruling. But however, these were not formally repealed. And so the significance of this is the Supreme Court is poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, or at least severely weaken its provisions. And so there is a chance that if that happens, this antiquated and dangerous pre-Roe provision could be enforced. And 8 in 10 Arizonans believe that abortion should be legal. And so House Bill 2097 and Senate Bill 1672 aligns Arizona law with values of its people. Now, the problem is these bills were never put on a calendar to be heard. And so this has been the case like year after year when advocates try to introduce proactive bills that would increase and not take away access to abortion for Arizonans. And so what's useful about this, though, is that it's still important to introduce these proactive bills because it gives us an opportunity to inform the public about what access could look like in our state. And it gives us an opportunity to mobilize people. We are in an election year. And so it gives people something to kind of dig their teeth into and be ready to, be inspired to achieve for Arizona.
Thank you so much for sharing that, DeShawn, and thank you, Desiree, as well, for sharing those different pieces of legislation. Thinking about reproductive rights at the policy level, we know that voting is, in many ways harm reduction, and it's obviously so important, but we also, obviously can see many times in which there are still harmful bills that are put in place, or these proactive legislative measures are not passed in the way we would want. And there are times as well when our elected officials just don't represent our interests. I love that you mentioned 8 out of 10 Arizonans believe that abortion should be legal. It just goes to show, many of the times that, our government is not on our side and doesn't really reflect the values that we care about. And so I just want to bring up the point that, it is in those times when the community is the one that really steps up and fills those gaps. And so in thinking about the ways that we can take action and, to promote and fight for reproductive justice, I want us to also talk about the ways, the proactive ways that the community can fight for reproductive justice, whether or not these types of legislations are in place. So I'll go ahead and start with you, DeShawn. Any examples you want to share with us about proactive ways the community can get involved?
So, the work that we're doing locally and across the country involves centering the real life experiences of people needing abortion care services and, using the reproductive justice analysis to focus on the ends, better lives, healthier families, and sustainable communities. And so, as Desiree mentioned, of course, there are, political actions that people can take. Signing up for requests to speak, civic engagement beyond voting is an organization that helps sign people up, and also becoming just more familiar with the organizations in your community that are fighting this fight to create the environment for us to be able to make decisions about our reproductive futures, not just in the vacuum of whether or not, we have the right to abortion, but whether or not we can access abortion. So we have, at the community level, we have our local abortion funds who have become so much more important now with these this fever pitch of restrictions that is causing people to need more tactical support, more mutual aid. We have our Arizona Abortion Fund, which there's going to be information available to you all in a document that will be shared at the end of this, and how to sign up and to volunteer and how to donate to those funds. What we are seeing are the effects of a long game that has been played by abortion opponents, and significant ground has been ceded. So the work ahead requires grassroots activation. We need to be building leadership in our communities of color, and our groups of intersectional marginalized groups like disability advocates, racial justice advocates, our intergenerational folks who have been in advocacy for years. We really have to start bridging across all types of groups to create coalitions and engage people who may have not historically been engaged in the fight for abortion access, because it's all interconnected. I have been saying for some time now that people who oppose abortion, this tracks very well, the extremists at least track very well with racism. And these attacks on voting rights track very well with our ability to maintain abortion access. Because the majority of people are with us in this fight, then keeping them from voting definitely maintains a minority rule in extremist conditions. And so I'll stop there because I'm sure Desiree has some things to say too. But you know, I think about how Obama became president. And I think about how Stacey Abrams almost became governor of Georgia. And what they tapped into was community. They tapped into organizing people who weren't usually involved in politics. We have passed the stage where people can say, "Oh, I don't do politics." Our lives are political. The fact that you know, we can wake up tomorrow and our rights are gone impacts our ability to live our lives. And you know, we've had master classes on how this works. But we've been a bit comfortable with the idea that, oh, we'll litigate. You know, you have these really hardcore advocates who are always fighting at the Capitol, lobbying, doing all these things, these laws pass, and then we sue, right? People like donate to the ACLU, people donate to CRR, and for the most part, we've been winning. But what has happened over the last, 4 years of having a 45th president of the United States, I won't say the name, the courts have been packed with judges who, have let, some of these things pass by when we had been relying on them to uphold our rights. And so we're at a place where, we have to proactively change the narrative, create the language, talk to one another, like really, let everyone know that abortion is healthcare. We all know and love someone who's had an abortion. Tell these stories and really make it okay to be okay with having an abortion or continuing a pregnancy under non-optimal conditions, right? So it goes both ways. There are these people who are told, stop having kids. I don't want my tax dollars to go toward helping you feed your children. But then in the same voice say, oh my gosh, don't have that abortion. Like the hypocrisy is wild. And so at the end of the day, we want to be supporting one another to make it okay and normalize the fact that abortion is healthcare. And it is part of a continuum of decisions that people can make throughout the course of their pregnancy and at different times in their lives.
Thank you so much, DeShawn. Yes to all of that. Abortion is healthcare. Absolutely. I know that there are probably folks in the room who also have questions. I could go on forever and ever, but I want to open the floor up to anybody else in the room that has a question. I saw Claudia had a question. Claudia, do you want to come off mute and ask our panelists? You can also feel free to drop it in the chat if you prefer as well. And for anybody else in the room as well, feel free to drop questions in the chat and I can read them out loud, or go ahead and you can raise your hand on Zoom and ask the panelists yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to say first, thank you so much, Desiree and DeShawn. This was super informative and really, really helpful. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I was just wondering, Desiree, how Planned Parenthood and you all, whether you all expect that SB 1164 is going to pass this session. And then I was also curious from both of you, Desiree and DeShawn, if you could share a little bit about if there's anything happening right now in Arizona around organizing or preparing for this Supreme Court case that, you know, we're going to get the results of in June, July, and if it doesn't go our way, are there any kind of organizing efforts or preparation right now that's happening?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. And Dr. Taylor, please feel free to jump in on the 1164 conversation as well. I mean, it's moving. If it passes the House, it is going to get signed by the governor. We don't have the numbers in the House, but the margins are also very slim. So I'm a big believer in hope. If we can organize hard enough to get 2 Republican House members to take a walk on the day of the vote, we might be able to do something about it. But it's gonna take a lot, right? We are seeing we don't have the same kind of national attention to our 15-week ban as Florida had to theirs. We're trying to figure out how can we perhaps get the business community to back us up. How are we doing outreach, not just talking to legislators and showing up to committee hearings, but in our communities to really make the public pressure of those 8 out of 10 Arizonans who don't want to see abortion banned in any form. How are we getting them to apply that pressure? How are we making it felt that 8 out of 10 Arizonans feel this way? So that way the legislators don't pass that vote, don't make that vote, leave the room that day. But it takes a lot of work. It's going to take all of us. We have some current actions right now, which are in the resource and education guide. I hope it doesn't pass, but the odds are tough.
I'll add that, you know, it's so difficult because you'll see these glimpses of these legislators are like, no, we really, you know, no more bans. Like, it's just not something that we're really interested in. Like some of the GOP legislators, you know, behind the scenes, you know, will share with certain people that, you know, this isn't a priority for them. However, what we find is that there is a party line that's been told, and there is this, you know, these think tanks of conservatives who provide legislators with this this legislation, and we want to sometimes, you know, they'll voice they don't want to vote and they don't want to do these, but then they get kind of rallied up and reminded that this is what we're supposed to be doing and you need to toe the line. And so that's kind of what we've been dealing with these things, and really trying to, with redistricting, there are some GLP legislators who are really concerned about these abortion bills and how that impacts their new constituents and their ability to keep their jobs. So definitely community pressure helps, and we want to keep applying that. But as Desiree said, if it passes the House, the governor will sign it. Like, there's no question.
Thank you both so much for that response. And thank you, Claudia, for asking that question as well. I have another question here from Alexis about some of your responses. She wanted to ask, is there an idea of who those persuadable may be when we're thinking about Republicans that we might be able to convince to, take a walk, as you said, on voting day? Any ideas of who we should target our efforts to?
The new LD2 is competitive, and Representatives Kaiser and Wilmoth, Steve Kaiser, Justin Wilmoth are in that new LD2. So we have been driving calls to their offices. In federal Congress, right? Those folks are used to getting hundreds and hundreds of calls, but at the Arizona state legislative level, if you can drive 60 calls to a legislator's office, that's going to get their attention. It's maybe not going to persuade them, but it's going to get their attention. It's going to help apply that public pressure. There are a couple other folks, but those two have been kind of my top priority in the House because of the new two.
Thank you so much, Desiree. And thank you so much, Alexis, for asking that question. We love to see the audience engagement. We're running a little short on time, so we're going to go ahead and move on. But again, we'll be sharing the contact information for both Desiree and DeShawn towards the end of this training. And I'm sure they'd be happy to take any additional questions that you may have. So now it's time for some fun. We're going to be celebrating National Abortion Provider Day together today and in anticipation for Thursday, March 10th, which is in 2 days. So just to give you a little bit of history about this special day and how it came to be, on March 10th of 1993, Dr. David Gunn was murdered by an anti-abortion extremist. And Dr. David Gunn was a medical doctor who had dedicated his life's work to providing abortion care to people in his community. So 3 years after that day, on Thursday, March 10th in 1996, that day became National Abortion Provider Appreciation Day. So it's a day to not only recognize the importance of allowing people to control their own reproductive lives, but it's also a day to, very explicitly say thank you to all the abortion providers who fight to keep that option of abortion available for folks in the community. So DeShawn, as she mentioned, runs the Next Generation of Abortion Providers training program, which trains medical students to become abortion providers. So she'll be passing along this virtual card to graduates of her program. So please take a few minutes to sign the card and leave an uplifting message for an abortion provider in our community here. Victoria just dropped the link in the chat. You can also scan that QR code with your phone and it'll pull up the link to sign the card. We're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes to let y'all do that. We're going to make it 3 minutes because we're running a little short on time. But again, all of these links will be available after the session as well, so that y'all can have more time to add what you'd like. And Victoria, if you want to play some music, that'd be awesome. And we'll give y'all, again, about 2 to 3 minutes to sign your name and leave an uplifting message on that virtual card.
En esta vida, todos nacemos para morirnos.
We'll give everybody about 30 more seconds. And again, you can continue working on this as I go through the next couple slides. Keep it pulled up on your computer so you can spend another minute or two after the training to work on it. All right, we're gonna move on. So we have a little bit more information to cover. Thank you, Victoria, for that. I'm gonna briefly debrief. I'm gonna say, let's see if one or two people can drop one takeaway from today's event, something that stuck out to you, surprised you, something you're still thinking about. I'll see one or two debriefs, and then we'll move on to discuss our next upcoming event and to give a big round of applause to our amazing panelists here. Let's see, go ahead and drop in the chat one or two takeaways, or one takeaway from today's training. And once I see one or two takeaways in the chat, we'll move on. And again, this can be surprised you, something that you want to learn more about, new information, something that reaffirms something you already knew. Lots happening at the state ledge around reproductive rights and a lot of opportunities to spread the word with our friends and community. Absolutely. Policies, not politics, are all of our business. Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes to all of that. Thank you both so much for sharing. We have a couple minutes left. For those of you who are able to stay a minute or two after, we would appreciate it. We have really important information to share right at the end of this training. And Cindy, the distinction between the words equity, equitable rights, et cetera, absolutely. So again, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. I want to give a big thank you and round of applause for Desiree and DeShawn. Shout out to Desert Star, shout out to Planned Parenthood. Please follow their socials, check out their websites and stay connected to their work. Both of these organizations have upcoming events as well as a host of other resources. Victoria is going to be dropping the link for that community resource guide again in the chat. This guide also has a ton of information about other organizations that I wanted to amplify today. I'll briefly touch on a couple of these. Either are other orgs doing reproductive justice work in the community. We have Parteras de Maíz. This empowers indigenous and traditional midwives in Arizona. Go with the Flow is an awesome organization that I found that provides menstrual hygiene products and menstrual health education to students in Arizona schools. Rooted Doula Collective, which I know DeShawn does some work with as well, is a collaborative community of Black doulas that provides doula support to Black people and families in AZ. And lastly, talking about the importance of mutual aid, the Tucson Abortion Support Collective helps to eliminate barriers and provide support to folks who are seeking abortion services in Southern Arizona and Northern Mexico. So again, all of these resources are in that community action guide. There's also a couple specific calls to action, things that our community needs you to do right now to help defend and protect reproductive justice in our communities. So petitions, links to volunteer, links to donate, surveys that we need filled out. So please take a look at that. Spend a couple minutes later this week or this weekend to get those action items done. I'm going to quickly plug our next event. You'll be seeing outreach from our org coming out about this soon. This will be our first in-person training of the year, so we're really excited. This training is on how to curate safe in-person events and thinking about COVID, how we can implement and communicate COVID mitigation strategies, how we can identify different decision points when we're thinking about organizing in person and training in person. So please use the link in the chat to RSVP for this training. It'll be at Cahoots, and it'll be in about a week on Wednesday, March 16th at 4 p.m. And last but not least, I have to give a huge shout out to Victoria. She works very, very hard on these surveys. We're gonna play some music as we close out the event, so y'all can pull up the survey either with the QR code or with the survey link that's being dropped right now. Please take 60 seconds to fill out the survey. It's really important to us. We deeply value your feedback, and it helps us improve our practices, helps give us new ideas for trainings, and continue to make trainings that are relevant and that are things that y'all want to learn about. So we would appreciate your feedback on this. Again, it should only take 60 seconds. So Victoria's going to go ahead and play some music. Please click the link and fill out the survey. And once you get that survey submitted, that'll bring us to the end of our training. So I just want to thank everybody here so very much for spending your afternoon with us. I can't say enough how much joy it brings me to be in community with all of you. Huge thank you again to our wonderful panelists. And just thank you both for being collaborators and thought partners with me. So I'll go ahead and play some music now while y'all get that survey done. And thank you all again. Please be safe and have a beautiful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you to those of you who are still on filling out the survey. That brings us so much joy. We're so grateful to hear your feedback. Whenever you get done with the survey, you're welcome to log off and go enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yay, we have 8 folks that have filled out the survey.
Woo!
Mhm.
I know that just made your whole